I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who goes through her child's phone. The kind who breaks trust, who spies, who becomes exactly what teenagers accuse parents of being: paranoid, controlling, invasive. But there I was at 2 in the morning, sitting on my bathroom floor with my daughter's unlocked laptop balanced on my knees, reading messages that made my blood run cold. Messages from someone named Lily Parker, a girl who claimed to be 15 and living in Seattle, a girl who had somehow convinced my daughter Hannah that they were best friends, soulmates even. A girl who wasn't a girl at all. The messages I found weren't just inappropriate. They were calculated, methodical, designed with precision to break down every barrier of safety I'd tried to build around my child. And the most terrifying part? Hannah had agreed to meet this person in 3 days. 3 days. I had 72 hours to save my daughter from something I couldn't fully comprehend yet, something that would lead me down a path involving federal agents, task forces, and a truth so disturbing that even now, months later, I wake up shaking. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first time Hannah mentioned Lily, I barely registered it. We were loading the dishwasher after dinner on a humid August evening, the kind of oppressive Texas heat that makes even breathing feel like work. Hannah was talking about her day in that scattered teenage way where topics blur together without clear transitions. Something about her biology homework being impossible, about Brooklyn Reed getting a new puppy, about this girl Lily who totally understood what it was like to feel invisible at school. I'd made some vague encouraging sound while scrubbing marinara sauce off a plate, probably something like "That's nice honey" or "I'm glad you found someone to talk to." The kind of autopilot parenting response you give when you're mentally already planning tomorrow's work deadline. Looking back, I want to shake that version of myself. I want to scream at her to put down the damn plate and actually listen. But hindsight is a cruel gift that way. The mentions of Lily became more frequent over the following weeks. Lily thinks this, Lily said that, Lily sent me the funniest meme. I was relieved, honestly. Hannah had struggled socially since we moved to Austin 2 years earlier. The divorce from Trevor had been messy, and relocating from our small house in the suburbs to a cramped apartment in a new city had stripped Hannah of her childhood friends at a vulnerable age. She'd spent most of 7th grade eating lunch alone, coming home with stories about girls who formed impenetrable cliques and boys who ignored her existence. Watching your child hurt is a special kind of torture that no one prepares you for. So when she started smiling at her phone, when she began laughing at messages during dinner instead of pushing food around her plate in silence, I felt grateful. Someone was making my daughter happy. I was a fool. The first warning sign came in late September during parent-teacher conferences at Westbrook High School. Mrs. Chen, Hannah's English teacher, mentioned that Hannah seemed distracted lately, frequently checking her phone during class despite the no device policy. When confronted, Hannah had become defensive in a way that was uncharacteristic of her usually compliant nature. She'd been given detention twice for refusing to surrender her phone when asked. That's not like her, I'd said, feeling that familiar parental defensiveness rising in my chest. Hannah's a good kid. She follows rules. Mrs. Chen had given me a look I didn't fully understand then, a mixture of sympathy and concern that felt almost pitying. I'm sure she is, Mrs. Donovan. But something has changed recently. She's secretive. Protective of her phone to an unusual degree. I've been teaching 14-year-olds for 20 years. I recognize the signs when something is consuming their attention in an unhealthy way. I'd promised to talk to Hannah, but when I did that evening, she'd rolled her eyes with perfect teenage exasperation. Mrs. Chen is dramatic, Mom. I was just texting Lily during free reading time. It's not a big deal. Everyone checks their phones in class. The explanation seemed reasonable. Annoying, yes. Worthy of a conversation about respecting classroom rules, definitely. But not alarming. Not yet. My best friend Natalie was the first person to voice actual concern. We were having coffee at our usual spot near campus in early October, catching up after my hectic work week designing marketing materials for a tech startup. Natalie taught chemistry at a different high school across town, and she had a teacher's instinct for teenage behavior that I'd always trusted. "So who is this Lily person?" she asked, stirring artificial sweetener into her latte. "Hannah mentions her constantly, but I don't remember you saying anything about her before this year." I shrugged, welcoming the warmth of my mug between my palms despite the lingering Texas heat outside. "Some girl she met online. They bonded over some video game or anime thing. I honestly can't keep track of what kids are into these days." Natalie's expression shifted, her easy smile fading into something more serious. "Online? Claire, have you actually verified who this person is?" The question irritated me, probably because it poked at an insecurity I'd been suppressing. "Of course. I mean, Hannah showed me her profile once. Another teenage girl. They video chat sometimes." "Sometimes?" Natalie pressed. "Or often? And during these video chats, have you actually seen this girl, or does Hannah go to her room and close the door?" I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. The truth was that I'd never actually witnessed one of these video calls. Hannah's door was always closed when she talked to Lily, and the one time I'd asked to meet this friend who meant so much to her, Hannah had gotten upset. She'd accused me of being invasive, of not trusting her, of treating her like a child. The fight had been exhausting enough that I'd backed off, telling myself I was respecting her privacy and growing independence. "Claire," Natalie said quietly, leaning across the table. "I'm not trying to be alarmist, but online predators are sophisticated now. They don't just lurk in chat rooms anymore. They build elaborate profiles, they spend months grooming kids, establishing trust. The fact that Hannah is so protective about this friendship, the fact that you've never actually verified this person's identity, it concerns me." "You think Lily might not be who she says she is?" The question sounded absurd even as I asked it. "Hannah's smart. She knows about stranger danger and internet safety. We've had those conversations. Smart kids are still kids," Natalie replied gently. "And predators specifically target children who are lonely, who are struggling socially. Kids like Hannah who've been through family disruption and are looking for connection. I'm not saying something is definitely wrong, but I am saying you should verify. Actually verify, not just take Hannah's word for it." The conversation haunted me for days. I told myself Natalie was overreacting, projecting worst-case scenarios from too many crime documentaries. But the seed of doubt had been planted, growing roots in the anxious soil of my maternal instinct. I started paying closer attention to Hannah's behavior, and what I noticed made my stomach clench with belated recognition. Hannah had become secretive in ways that went beyond normal teenage privacy. Her phone was always face down, always locked with a passcode I didn't know. She'd changed her laptop password without mentioning it. When I entered her room, she would immediately minimize whatever was on her screen or flip her phone over. She stayed up later and later, and I could see the blue glow of her screen under her door well past midnight on school nights. Her mood had become volatile in a way that felt new and unsettling. She would be euphoric one moment, practically dancing around the apartment, then plunge into irritable depression the next. The fluctuations seemed tied to her phone, to messages received or not received. She'd stopped wanting to do things we used to enjoy together. Movie nights were rejected in favor of staying in her room. Weekend trips to the farmer's market or the hiking trails around Austin no longer interested her. The only thing that seemed to matter was her phone, her laptop, her connection to Lily. Brooklyn Reed, Hannah's friend from school, stopped coming over. When I asked Hannah about it, she'd shrugged dismissively. "Brooklyn's being weird lately. She doesn't get me anymore. Not like Lily does." That phrase, "not like Lily does," had become Hannah's refrain for everything. Her father doesn't understand her, not like Lily does. Her teachers are unfair, but Lily gets it. I'm too strict, too controlling, but Lily thinks Hannah should have more freedom. Lily had become the standard against which everyone else in Hannah's life was measured and found lacking. I tried calling Trevor, thinking perhaps he'd noticed similar changes during Hannah's weekend visits to his place in Houston. The conversation was predictably frustrating. Trevor had always been dismissive of what he called my overprotective tendencies, and the divorce had only amplified his determination to be the fun parent, the one without rules or boundaries. "She seems fine to me," he'd said over the phone, and I could hear a football game playing in the background. "Maybe if you loosened up a bit, gave her some space, she wouldn't be so moody with you." This isn't about giving her space, Trevor. Something feels wrong. She's obsessed with this online friend. Kids have online friends now, Claire. It's a different generation. You can't expect her to only have friends from school. "Have you met this Lily? Have you seen her, verified she's actually a teenage girl?" A pause, then defensively, "No, but Hannah talks about her all the time. She's obviously important to her. Why are you always looking for problems?" The conversation had ended with both of us frustrated, a familiar pattern from our marriage. Trevor thought I worried too much. I thought he paid attention too little. Neither of us had been entirely wrong, which was partly why we were divorced. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in mid-October. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'd gotten home late from work, stressed about a client presentation that hadn't gone well. Hannah was supposed to have finished her homework and started dinner, a basic pasta dish we'd agreed she could handle. Instead, I walked into an apartment that was dark except for the glow coming from Hannah's room. No dinner preparations, no homework visible on the kitchen table where she usually worked. I knocked on her door, already feeling my blood pressure rising. "Hannah? It's almost 7. What happened to dinner?" No response, but I could hear typing, rapid and constant. I knocked again, harder. "Hannah, I'm talking to you." The typing stopped. A long pause, then irritably, "I forgot, okay? I'll make something in a minute." Something in her tone, the dismissive annoyance, the complete lack of acknowledgement that we'd had an agreement, made something snap inside me. I opened the door without asking permission, a violation of a boundary we'd established when she turned 13. Hannah was sitting on her bed, laptop open, wearing headphones. She yanked them off when I entered, her face flushing with anger. "Mom. I'm in the middle of something. You were supposed to start dinner an hour ago. We had an agreement." I said I forgot. God, can you not be so controlling for 1 second? The word controlling hit a nerve, echoing Trevor's accusations, echoing Hannah's increasingly frequent complaints. "I'm not being controlling. I'm being your mother. There are expectations and responsibilities that come with the privileges you have, like that laptop." "Whatever," Hannah muttered, turning back to her screen. I crossed the room before I'd consciously decided to move, driven by an instinct I couldn't name. I grabbed the laptop from her hands, ignoring her shriek of protest. "What are you doing? Give that back." I angled the screen toward me, and what I saw made my breath catch. A video chat window was open, but the camera on the other end was off, showing only a black screen with the name Lily Parker displayed. The chat history visible on the side of the screen contained messages that made my skin crawl. "Can't wait to finally meet you in person," one message read. "Just 3 more days, baby. 3 more days and you'll be with someone who really understands you. Baby." The word alone was wrong, inappropriate for one teenage girl to call another. But it was the next message that made my hands start shaking. "Remember, don't tell your mom about our plan. She won't understand. Parents never do. This is our secret, our special thing. Once we're together, everything will be perfect." Hannah was trying to grab the laptop back from me, her voice high and panicked. "Mom, stop. You have no right. That's private." I held the laptop away from her, scrolling rapidly through the chat history, my horror growing with each message I read. Months of conversations, hundreds of messages exchanged daily. Messages that started innocently enough, talking about school and hobbies and favorite shows, then gradually shifting into something darker. Compliments that became increasingly personal, comments about Hannah's appearance that felt wrong coming from another 15-year-old girl. References to how Hannah's mother was too strict, too controlling, how Hannah deserved freedom and understanding. Then the messages became more explicit. Not sexually explicit, I realized with growing dread, but emotionally manipulative in a way that felt calculated. Lily talking about how special Hannah was, how their connection was rare and precious, how nobody else could understand what they had together. How Hannah should trust Lily completely, how Lily would never hurt her or betray her like everyone else had. How they were soulmates who needed to be together physically, not just online. And scattered throughout, instructions. Delete messages after reading them. Don't tell your parents about our plans. Change your password so your mom can't access your accounts. If anyone asks questions, lie. The relationship between us is special, sacred, something that ordinary people wouldn't understand. Who is this person, Hannah? My voice came out strained, barely controlled. Have you video chatted with her? Have you actually seen her face? Hannah's expression shifted from anger to something like panic. Of course I have. We video chat all the time. Show me. Right now, call her and show me. I can't, she's not online right now. Mom, you're being crazy. Lily is my friend. My best friend. You're ruining everything. I looked at the screen again, at the messages planning a meetup in 3 days at Barton Creek Mall, at the detailed instructions about which entrance to use, about leaving her phone at home so I couldn't track her, about telling me she was going to Brooklyn's house for the afternoon. 3 days. 72 hours. This predator, because by now I was certain that's what Lily was, had been planning to meet my daughter in 3 days. We're calling the police, I said, my voice shaking. What? No. Mom, you can't. You'll embarrass me. Lily hasn't done anything wrong. Hannah, listen to me. I don't think Lily is who she says she is. These messages, the way she's telling you to keep secrets, to lie to me, this isn't normal friendship. This is something dangerous. You don't know anything. Hannah was crying now, angry, desperate tears. You've never even met her. She's the only person who understands me, who actually cares about me, and you're trying to ruin it because you can't stand that I have something that doesn't involve you. The accusation stung because part of it felt true. I had been feeling left out, pushed away by my daughter's growing independence. But maternal instinct, that primal protective force, overrode everything else. Something was terribly wrong. Every cell in my body was screaming danger. I'm keeping this laptop, I said firmly. And your phone. And tomorrow, we're going to the police to report this. You can't do this. It's my stuff. I'll call Dad. Call him. But until we figure out who this person really is, you're not communicating with them again. The fight that followed was the worst we'd ever had. Hannah screamed that I was ruining her life, that I didn't trust her, that she hated me. She tried to physically wrestle the laptop away from me. She threatened to run away, to go live with her father, to never speak to me again. Each word was a knife, but I held firm, driven by a fear so profound it eclipsed everything else. Eventually, exhausted and hoarse from crying, Hannah locked herself in her room. I sat in the living room with her laptop and phone, my hands trembling as I navigated through her accounts. Hannah had been smart about covering her tracks, deleting most messages, using apps I'd never heard of. But she'd left this one conversation open, perhaps because she'd been in the middle of it when I interrupted. I spent the next 3 hours reading everything I could find, taking screenshots, my stomach churning with each new discovery. The grooming was textbook, I would learn later. The predator had created an elaborate fake profile, complete with photos stolen from a real teenage girl's social media. They'd spent months building trust, establishing emotional intimacy, creating a dependency. They'd isolated Hannah from her real friends, from me, making her feel like this online relationship was the only authentic connection in her life. And they'd been planning to meet her. 3 days from now, at a public mall where a 14-year-old girl would walk willingly into the hands of someone who meant to harm her. At 2 a.m, unable to sleep, I did something I'd never done before. I took Hannah's laptop into the bathroom, closed the door, and searched for every piece of information I could find about Lily Parker from Seattle. The profile picture showed a pretty girl with long brown hair and a bright smile. The account claimed she was 15, homeschooled, interested in art and anime and video games. Everything designed to appeal to my lonely, creative daughter. But something felt off about the photos. They were high quality but oddly generic, like stock photos. I did a reverse image search on my phone, a trick Natalie had mentioned once. Within minutes, I found the truth. The photos belonged to a girl named Melissa Torres from California, someone whose Instagram had been public before she locked it down. Someone who had no idea her images were being used to catfish vulnerable teenagers across the country. Lily Parker didn't exist. The person talking to my daughter, manipulating her, planning to meet her, was someone else entirely. Someone pretending to be a teenage girl. Someone who had spent months grooming my child. I sat on that cold bathroom floor, laptop balanced on my knees, and cried silently so Hannah wouldn't hear me through the walls. I cried from relief that I discovered this in time. I cried from guilt that I hadn't noticed sooner. I cried from rage at whoever was on the other end of those messages, plotting to harm my daughter. And I cried from fear about what might have happened if I hadn't pushed open that door, hadn't grabbed that laptop, hadn't seen those final messages about meeting in 3 days. When the sun finally rose over Austin, I was still sitting there, now armed with screenshots and evidence and a determination that felt almost violent in its intensity. I wasn't going to wait. I wasn't going to second-guess myself. I was going to call the police the moment offices opened, and I was going to make sure they understood the urgency. My daughter had been targeted by a predator. And I had 72 hours to make sure that meetup never happened. Hannah didn't speak to me that morning. She emerged from her room for school red-eyed and silent, refusing breakfast, refusing to look at me. I'd already called her in sick, told the school she had a stomach bug. She'd need to miss today, possibly tomorrow. Normal life was suspended until this nightmare was resolved. After Hannah retreated back to her room, I called the non-emergency police line, my hands shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. Online predator. Grooming. Planned meetup. My 14-year-old daughter. The dispatcher took my information with professional calm and told me someone would call me back within an hour to schedule an interview. The hours stretched into 3, each minute an eternity. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. Screenshots of conversations. The fake profile information. The reverse image search results showing the stolen photos. Everything organized in a folder labeled evidence, as if giving it an official name would make the authorities take it seriously. When my phone finally rang, it wasn't the local police. It was a number I didn't recognize with a Dallas area code. Ms. Donovan? A man's voice, authoritative but not unkind. This is Agent Marcus Hayes with the FBI's Cybercrimes Division. I understand your daughter has been in contact with someone you believe to be a potential predator. I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning, and please don't leave out any details, no matter how small they seem. FBI. The word sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't just serious. This was federal-level serious. I told him everything. The months of friendship building, the isolation from real friends, the secretive behavior, the messages planning a meetup. I told him about the fake profile, the stolen photos, the manipulation tactics. I spoke for nearly 30 minutes while Agent Hayes occasionally asked clarifying questions, his tone remaining steady and calm in a way that somehow made me feel both reassured and more terrified. When I finished, there was a brief pause. Then Agent Hayes said something that made my blood run cold. Ms. Donovan, based on what you've described, I believe your daughter has been in contact with someone we've been tracking for several months. Someone who uses multiple fake identities to target teenage girls across several states. Someone very dangerous. The fact that you discovered this before the planned meetup potentially saved your daughter's life. The room seemed to tilt. Saved her life. Not saved her from trauma or saved her from a bad situation. Saved her life. What happens now? I managed to ask. Now, Agent Hayes said, we move fast. Agent Hayes arrived at my apartment within 2 hours, accompanied by Detective Linda Kowalski from the Austin Police Department's Internet Crimes Unit. I'd spent those 2 hours trying to explain to Hannah why FBI agents were coming to our home, a conversation that consisted mostly of her glaring at me with pure hatred while I struggled to find words that wouldn't sound like paranoid overreaction. The problem was that every word I spoke sounded exactly like paranoid overreaction until you'd seen the evidence, until you understood the scope of what had been happening. When I opened the door to find Agent Hayes, my first thought was that he looked nothing like the federal agents in movies. He was in his early 40s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt with a FBI windbreaker, carrying a laptop bag that looked well worn. Detective Kowalski was younger, maybe early 30s, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and an expression that suggested she'd seen enough of humanity's worst to not be surprised by anything anymore. "Miss Donovan," Agent Hayes said, extending his hand. "Thank you for contacting us so quickly. Time is critical in these situations. This is Detective Kowalski. She'll be coordinating with local law enforcement while we handle the federal investigation aspects." They settled at my kitchen table, the same table where Hannah and I had eaten countless dinners, where she'd done homework while I worked on my laptop nearby, where we'd planned birthday parties and discussed her hopes for high school. Now it was transformed into a command center for a criminal investigation involving my child. "I need to see everything," Agent Hayes said, opening his laptop. "Every message you found, every profile, every piece of communication. And I need to speak with Hannah directly." Hannah emerged from her room with the sullen defiance of a teenager who believes she's being persecuted for no reason. She sat as far from me as possible at the table, arms crossed, radiating resentment. Agent Hayes introduced himself with a gentleness that surprised me, explaining that he wasn't there to get her in trouble but to keep her safe. "Hannah, I need you to understand something," he said, his voice calm but serious. "The person you've been talking to, the person you know as Lily Parker, isn't who they claim to be. We've been tracking this individual for months across multiple states. They've been using different names and identities to contact teenage girls online." "You're wrong," Hannah said flatly. "Lily is real. We video chat. I've seen her." Agent Hayes pulled up something on his laptop and turned it toward Hannah. "What you saw during those video chats was likely pre-recorded footage or sophisticated filters. The person behind the Lily Parker account is not a 15-year-old girl. Based on the pattern of communication and the tactics used, we believe this is a male predator with a history of targeting minors." Hannah's face went pale. She looked at me, then back at Agent Hayes, and I saw the exact moment doubt crept in. "No. That's not possible. We talked about everything. She knew things about me. Personal things." "That's how grooming works," Detective Kowalski interjected, her tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. "Predators spend months building trust, learning everything about their victims, making them feel special and understood. It's manipulation, Hannah. Very calculated, very deliberate manipulation." The next hour was excruciating. Agent Hayes walked Hannah through the warning signs she'd missed, the red flags that had been waving frantically while she'd been too emotionally invested to see them. The requests to keep secrets from parents. The isolation from real-world friends. The way Lily had positioned herself as the only person who truly understood Hannah. The gradual progression toward planning an in-person meeting. Every tactic straight out of a predator's playbook. I watched my daughter's face as understanding slowly replaced denial. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hands started shaking. When Agent Hayes explained that the photos Lily used were stolen from a real girl in California who had no idea her images were being used to victimize other children, Hannah made a small sound that might have been a sob or a gasp. "What would have happened if I'd gone to meet her?" Hannah asked in a small voice. "If I'd gone to the mall like we planned?" Agent Hayes exchanged a glance with Detective Kowalski before answering. "Nothing good. These situations can range from abduction to assault to trafficking. The person behind that account had very specific plans for that meeting, and none of them involved just hanging out at a mall like two friends." Hannah turned to look at me then, really look at me for the first time since our fight the previous night. "Mom," she whispered, and I saw terror replacing anger in her eyes. Oh my God, Mom. I moved to her side of the table, and she collapsed against me, sobbing with the kind of desperate fear that only comes when you realize you've been standing at the edge of a cliff without knowing it. I held her while she cried, while Agent Hayes and Detective Kowalski gave us a moment, while the full weight of what almost happened settled over both of us like a suffocating blanket. When Hannah had calmed enough to speak, Agent Hayes continued. We need to use the planned meeting to our advantage. The person behind this account doesn't know we're aware of their identity or plans. We want to keep it that way until we can make an arrest. You want to use my daughter as bait, I said sharply, my protective instincts flaring. No, Agent Hayes said firmly. Hannah will be nowhere near the actual meetup. But we need whoever this is to believe the meeting is still happening. We need Hannah to continue messaging as if nothing has changed, to confirm the plans, to keep them engaged until we can set up a controlled operation. I can't, Hannah said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I can't talk to them knowing what they really are. You can, Detective Kowalski said gently. And you will, because every message you send keeps this predator focused on this planned meeting instead of moving on to target another child. We'll tell you exactly what to say. You'll never be alone. And when they show up at that mall expecting to meet you, we'll be there instead. The plan took shape over the next several hours. Hannah would send a message that evening confirming she was still excited about the meeting, still planning to sneak out as discussed. She would maintain the fiction that everything was normal, that her mother suspected nothing. Meanwhile, Agent Hayes would coordinate with a task force to set up surveillance at Barton Creek Mall, to prepare for an arrest the moment the predator arrived. What if they don't show up? I asked. What if they sense something is wrong? Then we continue investigating through other channels, Agent Hayes replied. But these predators are confident, often overconfident. They've usually succeeded before, which makes them believe they'll succeed again. The Lily Parker account has been active for over a year, which suggests this person has been doing this for a while without getting caught. That breeds a sense of invincibility. After Agent Hayes and Detective Kowalski left with copies of all the evidence, promising to return the next day to prepare Hannah for her role, I sat with my daughter in the dimming evening light of our living room. She was curled against my side, smaller and more fragile than she'd seemed in years, and I was struck by how quickly she'd transformed from defiant teenager back to frightened child. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I thought I was being smart. I thought I knew what I was doing. I know, sweetheart. These people are professionals at manipulation. This isn't your fault. But it is, she insisted, fresh tears streaming down her face. You tried to warn me about internet safety. You set rules about who I could talk to online. And I thought I knew better. I thought you were just being overprotective and controlling like Dad always says. The mention of Trevor reminded me I needed to call him, to explain what had happened. The thought filled me with dread because I knew exactly how that conversation would go. He would blame me for being too paranoid, then blame me for not being paranoid enough, then find some way to make this crisis about our failed marriage instead of about our daughter's safety. I called him after Hannah went to bed, emotionally exhausted. The conversation was every bit as awful as I'd anticipated. You're telling me my daughter has been talking to some pervert online for months and you didn't notice? Trevor's voice was sharp with accusation. Jesus, Claire, what the hell have you been paying attention to? I noticed something was wrong, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. That's why we caught it before anything happened. That's why Hannah is safe right now instead of missing. But months, Claire. Months of this going on right under your nose. How does that happen? It happens because predators are sophisticated, because teenagers are secretive, because I'm a single mother working full-time and doing my best. I snapped back, my control finally breaking. Where were you in all this, Trevor? When was the last time you had an actual conversation with your daughter instead of just letting her play video games at your place every other weekend? The argument spiraled from there, touching on every grievance from our marriage and divorce, until finally Trevor said something that made me go cold. Maybe Hannah should come live with me for a while. Clearly, you can't keep her safe. The suggestion was so absurd, so perfectly Trevor in its combination of criticism and abdication of actual responsibility, that I almost laughed. You think taking her away from her school, her friends, the support system we're building here, and moving her to Houston where you work 60 hours a week is going to keep her safer? At least I wouldn't be so wrapped up in my own life that I'd miss the signs of something like this happening. I hung up on him, something I'd wanted to do countless times during our marriage and had finally earned the freedom to do in divorce. Let him stew in his self-righteous indignation. I had more important things to focus on, like keeping my daughter safe and helping catch a predator. The next 2 days were a strange kind of purgatory. Hannah stayed home from school, too emotionally fragile to face her classmates and too involved in the FBI investigation to return to normal life. We met with Agent Hayes and Detective Kowalski multiple times, going over the plan, practicing the messages Hannah would send. They brought in a child psychologist who specialized in exploitation cases, a gentle woman named Dr. Park who helped Hannah process the emotional manipulation she'd experienced. You were targeted because you're exactly the kind of person worth knowing, Dr. Park explained during one session. Intelligent, creative, empathetic, thoughtful. Predators look for those qualities because they know children who possess them will form deep emotional connections. The fact that you're a good person made you vulnerable, not weak. Hannah spent hours with a FBI technician who taught her how to send messages that would keep the predator engaged without raising suspicion. They analyzed the pattern of Lily's previous messages, the emoji usage, the slang, the timing. Hannah would send a message in the morning confirming she was excited about meeting. Another in the afternoon saying her mom was going to be at work during the planned meetup time. A final one the evening before saying she couldn't wait, see you tomorrow. Each message felt like poison dripping from my daughter's fingers, even though I knew they served a purpose. Watching her type words of affection and anticipation to someone who had spent months planning to harm her was a special kind of torture. But Hannah approached it with a grim determination that made me proud even as it broke my heart. I'm doing this so they can't hurt anyone else, she told me the night before the planned meetup. So some other girl doesn't go through what I almost went through. Natalie came over that evening, bringing takeout that neither Hannah nor I had much appetite for. She sat with us in our living room, providing the kind of solid, undemanding support that defines true friendship. She didn't offer platitudes or try to minimize what we were going through. She just stayed, present and steady, a reminder that we weren't alone in this nightmare. How are you holding up? She asked me quietly while Hannah was in the bathroom. I don't know, I admitted. I keep thinking about what could have happened. About all the ways I almost missed this. About how close we came to disaster. But you didn't miss it, Natalie said firmly. You noticed something was wrong, you investigated, and you acted. That's what matters. What if I hadn't grabbed her laptop that night? What if I'd respected her privacy like she wanted? What if I'd listened to Trevor telling me I was being too controlling? Natalie gripped my hand hard. You trusted your instincts as a mother. You chose your child's safety over being liked or being the cool parent. That's not something to second guess, Claire. That's something to be proud of. The day of the planned meetup arrived with agonizing slowness. Agent Hayes had arranged for Hannah and me to be at the FBI field office in San Antonio, far enough away that there was no chance of us interfering but close enough that we could be updated in real time. We drove down that morning in near silence, both of us wound tight with anxiety and anticipation. The field office was nothing like I'd imagined from movies. It was an ordinary-looking office building with heightened security, filled with people in business casual attire working at computers and talking on phones. Agent Hayes met us in the lobby and escorted us to a conference room where several monitors displayed various camera angles of Barton Creek Mall. The operation is already underway, he explained, gesturing to the screens. We have agents positioned throughout the mall, dressed as shoppers and mall employees. Plainclothes officers from Austin PD are covering the exits. The moment our suspect arrives and makes contact with who they believe is Hannah, we move in. What if they don't come? Hannah asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in both of us. What if they got suspicious? Then we keep investigating, Agent Hayes said. But I don't think that's going to happen. Your messages were perfect, Hannah. You gave them no reason to doubt. We sat in that conference room for 3 hours, watching people move through the mall on those monitors, every teenager with a backpack making my heart race. Agent Hayes and his team communicated through earpieces, coordinating positions, watching for threats. Hannah sat beside me, her hand gripped tightly in mine, barely breathing. At 2:47 in the afternoon, exactly 13 minutes before the planned meeting time, one of the agents spoke urgently into his radio. "We've got a possible male, early 40s, entering through the north entrance. He's carrying a backpack and moving directly toward the food court meeting location." The figure on the screen was unremarkable. Average height, average build, wearing jeans and a casual jacket. He could have been any of the thousands of men who visit malls every day. Nothing about his appearance screamed danger. That was part of what made predators so effective, I realized. They looked normal. They blended in. They could be anyone. "Facial recognition confirms identity," another agent reported. Victor Brennan, age 42. Registered sex offender in Oregon and Washington. Multiple prior convictions for crimes against minors. Currently on parole. The name hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some faceless monster from my imagination. This was a real person with a history, with a pattern, with previous victims who had suffered because of him. And he'd been 13 minutes away from adding my daughter to that list. Hannah made a small sound beside me, and I pulled her close, shielding her eyes from the screen even though I couldn't look away myself. On the monitors, Victor Brennan was sitting at a table in the food court, checking his phone, looking around as if waiting for someone. He appeared calm, patient, completely confident that a 14-year-old girl would appear at any moment and walk trustingly into his trap. "All units move in," Agent Hayes commanded. What happened next unfolded with professional precision. The undercover agents converged from multiple directions, closing off exit routes before Brennan realized what was happening. One moment he was sitting peacefully, checking his phone. The next, he was surrounded by federal agents with weapons drawn, being ordered to place his hands on the table. For a split second, he looked confused. Then understanding dawned on his face, along with something else. Not fear or shame, but anger. Raw, ugly anger at being caught, at having his plans disrupted. Even through the grainy security footage, I could see it in the set of his shoulders, the twist of his mouth. "Victor Brennan, you're under arrest," Agent Hayes' voice came through the monitor feed. The charges were read, a litany of crimes that made my stomach turn. Child exploitation, attempted kidnapping, violations of sex offender registry requirements, and those were just the beginning. They found things in his backpack, Agent Hayes told us later, his expression grim. Restraints, sedatives, a prepaid phone, and detailed directions to a storage unit he'd rented. "We're executing a search warrant on that storage unit now, but based on his previous pattern, it was likely where he planned to take Hannah." I was grateful he spared us the details of what might have been in that storage unit, what purposes it might have served. Some nightmares didn't need concrete details to be understood. The arrest was clean, professional, executed without incident. Victor Brennan was taken into custody, transported to federal holding, charged with multiple felonies that would likely ensure he never saw freedom again. For the agents and officers involved, it was a successful operation, a dangerous predator removed from the streets. For Hannah and me, it was the moment we understood exactly what we'd narrowly escaped. We stayed in San Antonio overnight, too emotionally drained to make the drive back to Austin. Agent Hayes arranged for a hotel room and recommended we speak with the crisis counselor on call. Hannah declined, saying she just wanted to sleep, but I could see in her eyes that sleep wouldn't come easily for either of us that night. "Mom," she said as we were getting ready for bed in the generic hotel room with its impersonal furniture and air that smelled faintly of cleaning products. "What's going to happen to him?" "To Victor Brennan?" "He'll go to prison," I said. "For a very long time. What he did, what he tried to do, the law takes that seriously. But he did this before, right? He hurt other girls before me. And he got out. What if he gets out again?" It was a question I couldn't fully answer, a fear I shared. The justice system was imperfect, full of gaps and failures. But dwelling on that wouldn't help either of us now. We can only control what we can control, I finally said. And right now, that means making sure he faces justice for what he did. You were brave, Hannah. You helped catch him. I didn't feel brave, she whispered. I felt stupid. Stupid for not seeing what he really was. Stupid for believing someone online actually cared about me. I sat beside her on the hotel bed, choosing my words carefully. You felt lonely and wanted connection. That's not stupid, that's human. What he did was evil, calculating, and entirely his responsibility. Not yours. Never yours. She cried then, deep sobs that shook her whole body, releasing the terror and shame and confusion that had been building for days. I held her like I had when she was small, when scraped knees and hurt feelings could be soothed with hugs and bandages. But this wound went deeper, would take longer to heal, and there was no simple remedy beyond time and support and the hard work of processing trauma. When we finally returned to Austin the next afternoon, our apartment felt different somehow. The same furniture, the same layout, but transformed by knowledge into a place where something terrible had almost happened. Hannah's room, where she'd spent hours messaging with a predator thinking she was building a friendship, felt especially haunted. I want to change my room, Hannah said that evening, standing in her doorway looking at her space with hollow eyes. New paint, new arrangement, something. I don't want it to look the same. We can do that, I agreed immediately. Whatever you need. We spent the next week in a strange bubble, separated from normal life by the weight of what we'd experienced. Hannah didn't return to school immediately. I took leave from work, explaining in vague terms that we were dealing with a family crisis. Natalie brought groceries and sat with us through long evenings. Trevor called several times, but I let most of his calls go to voicemail, not ready to deal with his particular brand of crisis response. Agent Hayes contacted me regularly with updates. The search of the storage unit had revealed evidence of other victims, other girls Victor Brennan had targeted or harmed. The FBI was working to identify them, to offer support services, to build a comprehensive case that would ensure maximum sentencing. Hannah would likely need to testify at some point, to describe the grooming process, the manipulation tactics, the plans for the meeting. The thought terrified both of us, but Agent Hayes assured us we'd have time to prepare, that resources would be available to help Hannah through the process. The forensic analysis of Victor Brennan's devices revealed the scope of his operation. He'd been running multiple fake profiles across different platforms, targeting dozens of girls simultaneously, spending years building elaborate false identities. Lily Parker was just one of many personas he'd created, each designed to appeal to a specific type of lonely teenager. The level of calculation, of deliberate predatory patience, was staggering. Some of the other families he targeted aren't as lucky as you, Agent Hayes told me during one update call. Some of the girls are still missing. Some were found but significantly traumatized. Your quick action, your willingness to trust your instincts even when your daughter was pushing back, that saved Hannah from joining their ranks. The words should have been comforting, but instead they filled me with rage. Rage at a system that had allowed a convicted predator to have access to potential victims. Rage at the parents who maybe hadn't noticed warning signs or hadn't known what to look for. Rage at the technology that made it so easy for monsters to reach into children's bedrooms and manipulate them. Rage that felt righteous and justified and completely overwhelming. Dr. Park, the psychologist, helped us channel that rage into something productive. She worked with Hannah on processing the betrayal, on rebuilding trust in her own judgment, on understanding that being victimized didn't make her broken. She helped me navigate the guilt and fear that came with nearly missing a threat to my child. Together, we started the slow work of healing. Brooklyn Reed came over 3 weeks after the arrest, the first friend Hannah was willing to see. They sat in Hannah's partially redecorated room, speaking in low voices while I pretended not to hover anxiously nearby. When Brooklyn left, Hannah seemed lighter somehow, a small portion of normalcy restored. She was worried about me, Hannah told me afterward. She noticed when I stopped wanting to hang out, when I got secretive. She tried to talk to me about it, but I pushed her away because Lily said real friends wouldn't question my choices. That isolation tactic is common, I said gently. making you pull away from people who actually cared about you so you'd be more dependent on the manipulator. I owe Brooklyn an apology, Hannah said. A big one. For being a terrible friend. She'll understand. Real friends do. Hannah did return to school eventually, carrying the weight of her experience but also a new awareness that would serve her well. The school counselor was briefed on what had happened, prepared to offer support if Hannah struggled. Her teachers were informed in vague terms that she'd been through a family crisis and might need accommodation. Most importantly, Hannah herself was different now. More cautious, yes, but also more resilient. She'd faced something terrible and survived. That survival held power. The legal process moved forward with bureaucratic slowness. Victor Brennan remained in federal custody, denied bail given his flight risk and danger to the community. His public defender entered a not guilty plea despite overwhelming evidence, a legal formality that everyone knew would eventually give way to either a plea bargain or conviction at trial. Agent Hayes assured us that Hannah's testimony, when the time came, would be carefully managed to minimize trauma while still holding Brennan accountable. Meanwhile, something unexpected began to happen. Agent Hayes contacted me with a request that caught me off guard. We're developing new training materials for parents and educators about recognizing online grooming, he explained. Your experience, the way you noticed warning signs and acted quickly, that's exactly the kind of case study that could help other families. Would you be willing to share your story? The request terrified me and energized me in equal measure. The thought of making our private nightmare public felt exposing, vulnerable. But the possibility that our experience might protect other children, might help other parents trust their instincts, felt meaningful in a way I desperately needed. Something good emerging from something terrible. I talked to Hannah about it that evening over dinner in our kitchen, the space that had transformed from crime scene to command center and was slowly becoming just our kitchen again. How would you feel about me speaking publicly about what happened? Not using your name, not giving identifying details, but sharing the warning signs, the tactics Brennan used, the importance of parents staying vigilant? Hannah was quiet for a long time, pushing pasta around her plate. Finally, she looked up. If it helps even one kid, then yes. Do it. Tell them everything. The first speaking engagement came 6 months after Victor Brennan's arrest. Agent Hayes had connected me with a coalition of parents and advocacy groups focused on internet safety, and they'd invited me to speak at a conference in Dallas attended by school administrators, law enforcement, and child welfare professionals. Standing backstage in a hotel conference room, watching presenters discuss statistics and policy through a gap in the curtain, I felt my hands shake with nervous energy. You don't have to do this, Natalie said beside me. She'd driven up with me for moral support, refusing to let me face this alone. You've already done so much just by protecting Hannah. I need to, I replied, surprised by the certainty in my voice. If I can help one parent recognize the signs I almost missed, if I can save one child from what Hannah almost experienced, then standing up here and telling our story matters more than my comfort. When my name was called, I walked onto that stage carrying note cards I'd written and rewritten a dozen times. The audience was perhaps 200 people, their faces a blur of professional attention. I'd prepared a speech about warning signs and grooming tactics, about the importance of monitoring without invading privacy, about trusting parental instinct even when teenagers push back. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was rawer, more honest than anything I'd scripted. I told them about being a single working mother who thought she was doing everything right. About the guilt of missing months of manipulation happening under my own roof. About the terrifying moment of reading those messages and understanding my daughter had been targeted by evil disguised as friendship. I told them about Hannah's anger when I took her devices, about her insistence that I was ruining her life, and about the courage it took to prioritize her safety over being liked. I told them about the FBI investigation, the sting operation, the arrest of a predator who had victimized multiple children across several states. My voice cracked when I described seeing Victor Brennan on those security monitors, sitting calmly in a food court waiting for my 14-year-old daughter to walk into his trap. Several people in the audience wiped their eyes. A few nodded with recognition, perhaps seeing their own families in my story. The questions afterward were thoughtful and sometimes painful. How did you know something was wrong? What specific behaviors raised red flags? How did you repair your relationship with Hannah after violating her privacy? How do you balance protecting children with respecting their growing independence? I answered as honestly as I could, acknowledging that I didn't have all the solutions, that I'd made mistakes, that I'd gotten lucky in catching the threat before it materialized into tragedy. After the presentation, people approached me with their own stories. A father whose son had been groomed through a gaming platform. A teacher who'd noticed a student exhibiting warning signs but didn't know how to intervene. A police officer who'd worked cases involving missing children and wished more parents had Claire's instincts. Each conversation reinforced that this wasn't just our story. It was happening everywhere, to families who thought they were safe, to children who thought they were being careful. One woman waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. She was probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and a professional bearing that suggested she worked in education or counseling. "Your daughter is very lucky," she said quietly. "My niece wasn't. She met someone online 3 years ago. We found her 2 weeks later. She survived, but she's not the same child she was before." The weight of that statement, the lifetime of trauma compressed into those few words, made my throat tight. "I'm so sorry," I managed. "For your niece, for your family." She gripped my hand firmly. "Don't be sorry. Be loud. Keep telling your story. Keep making people uncomfortable with how easy it is for predators to reach our children. Keep pushing for change. That's how we honor the ones who weren't as fortunate as Hannah." Her words became a kind of mission statement for me. Over the following months, I spoke at more conferences, at parent-teacher organizations, at community centers. I worked with Agent Hayes and his team to develop training materials that law enforcement could use when educating the public. I connected with other parents who'd experienced similar crises, forming an informal support network of people who understood the unique trauma of nearly losing a child to online predation. The work was emotionally exhausting, requiring me to relive our nightmare repeatedly for audiences of strangers. But it was also healing in unexpected ways. Each time I told our story, it felt less like a wound and more like a lesson. Each person who approached me afterward to say they'd be more vigilant with their own children made the discomfort worthwhile. I was transforming our family's crisis into something purposeful, something that might prevent other families from experiencing the same terror. Hannah's healing progressed in fits and starts, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. She returned to therapy regularly, working through feelings of betrayal and violated trust that extended beyond Victor Brennan to her own judgment. Dr. Park helped her understand that being manipulated by a professional predator didn't make her stupid or naive, that the tactics used against her were designed to exploit normal human needs for connection and understanding. School remained challenging. The thought of making our private nightmare public felt exposing, vulnerable. But the possibility that our experience might protect other children, might help other parents trust their instincts, felt meaningful in a way I desperately needed. Something good emerging from something terrible. I talked to Hannah about it that evening over dinner in our kitchen, the space that had transformed from crime scene to command center and was slowly becoming just our kitchen again. "How would you feel about me speaking publicly about what happened? Not using your name, not giving identifying details, but sharing the warning signs, the tactics Brennan used, the importance of parents staying vigilant?" Hannah was quiet for a long time, pushing pasta around her plate. Finally, she looked up. "If it helps even one kid, then yes. Do it. Tell them everything." The first speaking engagement came 6 months after Victor Brennan's arrest. Agent Hayes had connected me with a coalition of parents and advocacy groups focused on internet safety, and they'd invited me to speak at a conference in Dallas attended by school administrators, law enforcement, and child welfare professionals. Standing backstage in a hotel conference room, watching presenters discuss statistics and policy through a gap in the curtain, I felt my hands shake with nervous energy. "You don't have to do this," Natalie said beside me. She'd driven up with me for moral support, refusing to let me face this alone. "You've already done so much just by protecting Hannah." "I need to," I replied, surprised by the certainty in my voice. "If I can help one parent recognize the signs I almost missed, if I can save one child from what Hannah almost experienced, then standing up here and telling our story matters more than my comfort. When my name was called, I walked onto that stage carrying note cards I'd written and rewritten a dozen times. The audience was perhaps 200 people, their faces a blur of professional attention. I'd prepared a speech about warning signs and grooming tactics, about the importance of monitoring without invading privacy, about trusting parental instinct even when teenagers push back. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was rawer, more honest than anything I'd scripted. I told them about being a single working mother who thought she was doing everything right. About the guilt of missing months of manipulation happening under my own roof. About the terrifying moment of reading those messages and understanding my daughter had been targeted by evil disguised as friendship. I told them about Hannah's anger when I took her devices, about her insistence that I was ruining her life, and about the courage it took to prioritize her safety over being liked. I told them about the FBI investigation, the sting operation, the arrest of a predator who had victimized multiple children across several states. My voice cracked when I described seeing Victor Brennan on those security monitors, sitting calmly in a food court waiting for my 14-year-old daughter to walk into his trap. Several people in the audience wiped their eyes. A few nodded with recognition, perhaps seeing their own families in my story. The questions afterward were thoughtful and sometimes painful. How did you know something was wrong? What specific behaviors raised red flags? How did you repair your relationship with Hannah after violating her privacy? How do you balance protecting children with respecting their growing independence? I answered as honestly as I could, acknowledging that I didn't have all the solutions, that I'd made mistakes, that I'd gotten lucky in catching the threat before it materialized into tragedy. After the presentation, people approached me with their own stories. A father whose son had been groomed through a gaming platform. A teacher who'd noticed a student exhibiting warning signs but didn't know how to intervene. A police officer who'd worked cases involving missing children and wished more parents had Claire's instincts. Each conversation reinforced that this wasn't just our story. It was happening everywhere, to families who thought they were safe, to children who thought they were being careful. One woman waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. She was probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and a professional bearing that suggested she worked in education or counseling. "Your daughter is very lucky," she said quietly. "My niece wasn't. She met someone online 3 years ago. We found her 2 weeks later. She survived, but she's not the same child she was before." The weight of that statement, the lifetime of trauma compressed into those few words, made my throat tight. "I'm so sorry," I managed. "For your niece, for your family." She gripped my hand firmly. "Don't be sorry. Be loud. Keep telling your story. Keep making people uncomfortable with how easy it is for predators to reach our children. Keep pushing for change. That's how we honor the ones who weren't as fortunate as Hannah." Her words became a kind of mission statement for me. Over the following months, I spoke at more conferences, at parent-teacher organizations, at community centers. I worked with Agent Hayes and his team to develop training materials that law enforcement could use when educating the public. I connected with other parents who'd experienced similar crises, forming an informal support network of people who understood the unique trauma of nearly losing a child to online predation. The work was emotionally exhausting, requiring me to relive our nightmare repeatedly for audiences of strangers. But it was also healing in unexpected ways. Each time I told our story, it felt less like a wound and more like a lesson. Each person who approached me afterward to say they'd be more vigilant with their own children made the discomfort worthwhile. I was transforming our family's crisis into something purposeful, something that might prevent other families from experiencing the same terror. Hannah's healing progressed in fits and starts, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. She returned to therapy regularly, working through feelings of betrayal and violated trust that extended beyond Victor Brennan to her own judgment. Dr. Park helped her understand that being manipulated by a professional predator didn't make her stupid or naive, that the tactics used against her were designed to exploit normal human needs for connection and understanding. School remained challenging. Hannah had missed enough classes during the investigation that catching up academically proved difficult. Some of her classmates had heard rumors about why she'd been absent, garbled versions of the truth that painted her as either a victim to be pitied or someone who'd done something shameful. Brooklyn remained steadfast, but other friendships had fractured during the months when Hannah had isolated herself under Lily's influence. One afternoon I got a call from the school counselor asking me to come in for a meeting. My stomach dropped, assuming Hannah was in some kind of trouble. Instead, I found Hannah sitting in the counselor's office looking nervous but determined. "Mom," the counselor began gently, "Hannah came to me with an idea, and I think you should hear it directly from her." Hannah took a deep breath. "I want to start a club at school. About internet safety and recognizing manipulation. Not just the scary lecture stuff adults usually do, but real conversations led by students who understand what it's actually like online. I could share what happened to me, not all the details, but enough that other kids might recognize if it's happening to them." The proposal caught me completely off guard. The thought of Hannah making herself vulnerable to her peers, of exposing what had happened to the judgment of teenagers who could be thoughtlessly cruel, terrified me. But looking at my daughter's face, seeing the determination there mixed with understandable fear, I recognized something important. She was taking back power over her narrative. She was choosing to transform her victimization into advocacy. "That's a big step," I said carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of exposure?" "I don't know if I'm ready," Hannah admitted. "But I keep thinking about what Dr. Park said, about how predators count on kids being too embarrassed to tell anyone when something feels wrong. If I can make even one person at my school feel like they can speak up, then it's worth it." The counselor and I discussed logistics, safeguards, ways to support Hannah while protecting her emotional well-being. The club would be voluntary, meeting after school once a week. Hannah would have faculty oversight and could stop participating at any time if it became too overwhelming. The counselor would screen membership to ensure students were joining for constructive reasons rather than morbid curiosity. The first meeting of Students for Digital Awareness drew 12 participants, a mix of freshmen and sophomores who gathered in a classroom after the final bell. Hannah had prepared remarks with Dr. Park's help, finding a balance between honest disclosure and appropriate boundaries. Watching her stand before her peers and explain that she'd been groomed by an online predator, that she'd nearly met with someone who intended to harm her, took more courage than I possessed. Her voice shook but didn't break. Several students asked thoughtful questions. One girl admitted she'd been in a similar situation but had been too scared to tell anyone. After that first meeting, Hannah came home exhausted but energized in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Mom," she said, collapsing on our couch, "this girl Ashley told me she's been talking to someone online who keeps asking her to send photos. She knew it felt wrong but didn't know who to tell. We talked about reporting it, about blocking the account. I might have just helped keep her safe." The pride I felt was overwhelming. My daughter, who had been victimized and traumatized, was using her experience to protect others. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever almost happened to her and transformed it into a shield for her peers. As Hannah grew stronger through her advocacy work, I found my own sense of purpose expanding. The speaking engagements led to consultation opportunities with tech companies trying to improve their safety features for young users. I worked with platform developers to understand how predators exploited their systems, suggesting safeguards that might make grooming more difficult. Some companies were genuinely interested in protecting users. Others seemed more concerned with avoiding liability. The difference became clear quickly, and I learned to focus my energy where it might actually create change. One consultation brought me to a meeting with a team from a major social media platform struggling with how to balance user privacy with child safety. The conference room in their sleek downtown office felt sterile and corporate, filled with young engineers and product managers who seemed brilliant about code but naive about human predatory behavior. I walked them through Hannah's case, explaining how Victor Brennan had used their platform's features to isolate her, to build trust, to gradually push boundaries. I showed them the progression of messages, the way he'd exploited their encryption to hide criminal grooming from any oversight. The discomfort in the room was palpable as they realized their technology, designed with good intentions, had been weaponized against a child. One engineer, probably in his late 20s with the earnest intensity of someone who genuinely believed technology could solve every problem, raised his hand. "But how do we protect children without compromising everyone's privacy? Without turning our platform into a surveillance state?" It was the central tension in every conversation about online safety, and I didn't have a perfect answer. You build in friction, I suggested. Make it harder for adults to initiate contact with minors they don't already know. Create prompts that encourage children to talk to trusted adults when someone asks them to keep secrets. Train your AI to recognize grooming language patterns. None of these solutions are perfect, but perfect is the enemy of good. Every barrier you build might slow down a predator long enough for a parent to notice, for a child to recognize something is wrong. The consultation led to others, which led to an unexpected opportunity. A nonprofit organization focused on child safety online reached out about a position they were developing. They needed someone to lead their parent education and community outreach program, someone who understood both the technical aspects of online platforms and the human reality of families navigating digital dangers. Someone who could speak to parents without condescension, to teenagers without lecturing, to policymakers without jargon. The job would require giving up my graphic design work, my comfortable if unexciting career that paid the bills but didn't ignite passion. It would mean irregular hours, travel for speaking engagements, and immersion in the sometimes dark world of online exploitation. But it would also mean taking the worst experience of my life and building something meaningful from it. I discussed it with Hannah over dinner, explaining the opportunity and what it would mean for both of us. More time away from home for conferences and training sessions. More public attention on our story. The possibility that my work might occasionally put me in contact with difficult people and situations. Hannah listened carefully, then said something that made my decision easy. Mom, you've spent your whole life taking care of me. Making sure I'm safe, that I have what I need. But I've watched you these past months, speaking at those events, working with the FBI team, fighting to protect other kids. You're different now. Like you finally found something that matters beyond just surviving. I think you should do it. She was right. Somewhere between that terrifying night of discovering the messages and this moment of potential new beginning, I'd transformed. The single mother who'd been just getting by, managing work and parenting with grim determination, had discovered a fierce advocacy that gave everything new meaning. I'd found purpose in the worst possible way, but purpose nonetheless. I accepted the position at the nonprofit, officially titled Director of Family Engagement and Education. My first day involved meeting a team of dedicated professionals, psychologists, former law enforcement, tech experts, all united by commitment to protecting children in digital spaces. They welcomed me not as a victim who'd gotten lucky but as a colleague who brought lived experience to complement their expertise. The work was harder and more rewarding than anything I'd done before. I developed curriculum for parent workshops, created resources that schools could use to educate students and families, consulted with law enforcement on cases involving online exploitation. I traveled to communities across Texas and neighboring states, training people to recognize warning signs, to have difficult conversations with children about online safety, to report concerns without shame or hesitation. Each presentation brought new stories, new families touched by online predation in various forms. Some had experienced the same grooming tactics Victor Brennan had used. Others had dealt with cyberbullying, sextortion, exposure to inappropriate content. The scope of digital threats facing children was vast and constantly evolving. But so were the solutions, the community of people working to make online spaces safer. Hannah and I found a new rhythm in our lives, both of us transformed by what we'd survived. She continued leading her school club, which grew from 12 members to over 30 by the end of the academic year. She testified at Victor Brennan's sentencing hearing, describing the emotional manipulation and fear she'd experienced. Her testimony was powerful, articulate, devastating in its honesty. The judge sentenced Brennan to 25 years in federal prison, acknowledging that his predatory pattern and the number of victims warranted maximum consequences. After the sentencing, Hannah and I stood outside the courthouse in the harsh sunlight of a San Antonio afternoon. She'd been nervous about testifying, worried about facing Brennan even with all the courtroom protections in place. But she'd done it, had spoken her truth to power, had ensured he faced justice for what he'd done and tried to do. "How do you feel?" I asked her as we walked to the parking garage. She considered the question carefully before answering. "Not better, exactly. He'll still always be the person who did this to me, who made me doubt myself, who almost destroyed everything. But I feel like I took back something he tried to steal. My voice. My power to decide what this means for my life. Her wisdom at 15 astounded me. She'd been forced to grow up faster than any child should, to understand darkness and manipulation and the reality that monsters look like normal people. But she'd also developed resilience, empathy, and a commitment to protecting others that would serve her well throughout life. We started occasionally speaking together at events, mother and daughter sharing different perspectives on the same nightmare. I would discuss the parental experience of discovering the threat, the terror of nearly missing it, the investigation and aftermath. Hannah would speak to what it felt like to be groomed, how predators make manipulation feel like friendship, how isolation tactics work on teenagers who don't even realize they're being isolated. Our presentations were powerful because they were real, because we didn't minimize the difficulty or pretend there were easy answers. Parents asked how to balance trust with vigilance. Teenagers admitted they sometimes hid online activities from adults because they feared overreaction. We addressed both concerns honestly, acknowledging the tension while emphasizing that safety had to come first, that privacy was earned through demonstrated judgment and open communication. One evening after a particularly emotional presentation where several parents had broken down describing their own close calls, Hannah and I sat in a hotel room reviewing the feedback forms attendees had filled out. Most were positive, grateful for our honesty and practical advice. But one stood out, a simple note that said, "Your story saved my daughter." I noticed the same warning signs you described, checked her computer, found similar messages. We got help before anything happened. Thank you. I showed the note to Hannah, watching tears fill her eyes as she read it. This, I said quietly, is why we keep doing this. Why we keep telling our story even when it's painful. Because somewhere, some child is safer because of what we survived. Hannah nodded, carefully folding the note and slipping it into her bag. I'm keeping this, she said. For the hard days when I wonder if any of this matters. Natalie remained our anchor through everything, providing perspective when we got too deep into the advocacy work, reminding us to maintain balance between the mission and normal life. She organized girls' nights with Hannah, giving her opportunities to be a regular teenager rather than a survivor and advocate. She took me to movies and dinners, forcing me to talk about things other than online predators and safety protocols. You're doing important work, she told me one evening over Thai food at our favorite restaurant. But you can't let it consume you completely. You're still Claire, still Hannah's mom, still a person who deserves joy and rest and silly conversations about nothing important. She was right, as usual. The advocacy work was meaningful but also emotionally draining in ways that required deliberate self-care. I started setting boundaries, blocking off weekends for family time, saying no to speaking engagements that would interfere with Hannah's school events. I found a therapist of my own, someone who specialized in secondary trauma and helped me process the vicarious exposure to exploitation cases that came with my work. Trevor eventually came around, though it took longer than I would have liked. He'd initially been defensive about his parenting, insisting he would have noticed if Hannah had been at his house during the grooming period. But gradually, through conversations with Hannah and exposure to the education materials I'd developed, he began to understand the sophistication of modern predators. He started attending some of my local presentations, sitting in the back looking uncomfortable but present. After one session, he approached me hesitantly. I owe you an apology, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. I dismissed your concerns, accused you of being paranoid, made this about our divorce instead of Hannah's safety. You saved our daughter because you paid attention when I wasn't. I'm sorry. The apology was imperfect and overdue, but genuine. I accepted it, recognizing that blaming each other served no purpose. We were both Hannah's parents, both responsible for her well-being, both capable of learning from what had almost happened. As months turned into over a year since Victor Brennan's arrest, our lives settled into a new normal that incorporated the trauma without being defined by it. Hannah maintained good grades, rebuilt friendships, continued her advocacy work at a sustainable pace. I found fulfillment in my nonprofit work, in the knowledge that our experience was helping protect other families. We talked openly about what had happened, processing new feelings as they emerged, acknowledging that healing wasn't linear. Dr. Park helped us understand that trauma anniversaries might be difficult, that certain triggers might cause unexpected emotional reactions, that complete healing wasn't about forgetting but about integrating the experience into our larger life narrative. The month of October, when I discovered the messages and everything had unraveled, would probably always carry weight. But we could plan for that, could support each other through it, could recognize it without letting it control us. Hannah's 15th birthday arrived with a small celebration, just family and close friends at our favorite pizza place. Watching her laugh with Brooklyn and her other friends, seeing her blow out candles with Trevor and me flanking her, I marveled at her resilience. This was the same girl who'd been targeted by a predator, who'd been groomed and isolated and nearly destroyed. But she'd survived, had grown stronger, had become someone who used her pain to protect others. That night, after everyone had gone home and Hannah was in bed, I sat in our living room reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. From that terrifying moment of discovery to this place of hard-won peace, we traveled a path I never could have imagined. I'd become an advocate, found professional purpose in unexpected places, learned that maternal instinct was worth trusting even when everyone questioned it. My phone buzzed with an email from Agent Hayes, updating me on another predator they'd arrested using some of the training materials we developed together. The case involved a 14-year-old girl in Oklahoma who'd shown her mother concerning messages, leading to an investigation that ended with another dangerous person in custody. Another child safe. Another family spared our nightmare. I saved the email in a folder I kept labeled Wins, a collection of reminders about why the work mattered when it felt overwhelming. Tomorrow I had a presentation at a middle school in Austin, talking to 7th graders about digital literacy and recognizing manipulation. Hannah would join me for part of it, sharing her perspective in the carefully boundaried way we developed. But tonight, I was just a mother whose daughter was safe upstairs, who transformed terror into purpose, who'd learned that sometimes the worst moments of our lives crack us open to reveal strength we never knew we possessed. I'd faced evil and won. Not perfectly, not without scars, but decisively. And I was using that victory to ensure others might face similar threats with knowledge, resources, and the understanding that trusting your instincts as a parent could mean the difference between tragedy and survival. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing grant proposals in my office at the nonprofit. Agent Hayes' name appeared on my phone screen, which wasn't unusual since we collaborated regularly on training programs and case consultations. But something in his tone when I answered made my shoulders tense immediately. "Claire, we need to talk about something sensitive. Can you come to the field office this week? I'd prefer to discuss this in person." My mind immediately went to Hannah, to some new threat or development in Victor Brennan's case. Is Hannah in danger? Is there something I need to know right now? No, nothing like that. This isn't about an immediate threat. But there's been a development that affects your family indirectly, and I think you should be aware of it before it becomes public knowledge. The vagueness was more unsettling than a direct explanation would have been. I agreed to drive to San Antonio the following morning, spending the evening trying not to spiral into worst-case scenarios. Hannah noticed my distraction over dinner but didn't press when I explained I had a routine meeting with Agent Hayes about an ongoing project. The next morning, I made the drive to the FBI field office with an anxiety I couldn't fully explain. Agent Hayes met me in the same conference room where we'd watched Victor Brennan's arrest unfold on security monitors nearly 2 years ago. That day felt simultaneously like yesterday and a lifetime ago. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I want to start by emphasizing that what I'm about to tell you doesn't pose any direct threat to Hannah or your family. But it involves Victor Brennan, and given your advocacy work and public profile, you deserve to be informed before the media gets hold of it." My stomach knotted. What happened? Agent Hayes opened a file folder, though he seemed to be organizing his thoughts rather than referencing specific documents. Victor Brennan has been in federal custody for 22 months now. His behavior in prison has been what we'd expect from someone with his pathology. He's joined groups, positioned himself as a mentor figure to younger inmates, tried to gain trust and access. The prison psychologist has documented clear signs that he hasn't reformed or developed genuine remorse. That wasn't surprising, though hearing it confirmed was still disturbing. Predators like Brennan rarely changed their fundamental nature simply because they were incarcerated. Agent Hayes continued. 3 weeks ago, prison officials discovered that Brennan had been using a contraband phone to contact individuals outside the facility. He'd been making calls and sending messages for at least 4 months before he was caught. The investigation into how he obtained the phone and who facilitated it is ongoing. Horror washed over me as I understood the implications. He was contacting potential victims? From prison? Worse. Agent Hayes's expression was grim. He was contacting families of his previous victims. Specifically, he was attempting to reach the parents of girls he'd groomed, including you. The room seemed to tilt. What? He never got through to you directly because he didn't have your current phone number. You changed it after the trial, which was smart. But he contacted several other families, claiming he wanted to apologize, to seek forgiveness as part of his supposed rehabilitation. The calls were manipulative, designed to sound remorseful while actually gathering information and attempting to re-establish psychological control. Did he try to call me? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Agent Hayes pulled out a printout. He placed several calls to numbers associated with your previous address in Philadelphia, which he apparently got from old court documents or online searches. Those calls went to whoever lives there now. He also sent letters to your old address, which were forwarded by the Postal Service to your current apartment before prison officials caught on and stopped them. I never received any letters. Relief mixed with new fear. Did the Postal Service intercept them? No, they were delivered to your current address over the past few months. Small envelopes, handwritten addresses, probably looked like personal correspondence rather than anything alarming. I tried to remember my mail from recent months, the stack of bills and advertisements and occasional actual letters. Then it clicked. Hannah sometimes brought in the mail when she got home from school before me. Had she received letters from Victor Brennan and not told me? Agent Hayes seemed to read my expression. We need to ask Hannah if she received any correspondence from Brennan. If she did, we need to know what they contained and whether she responded. This isn't about getting her in trouble, but we need to understand the scope of his contact attempts. The drive back to Austin felt interminable. I called the school from my car and asked them to have Hannah ready to leave early, citing a family matter. The counselor's concerned questions made it clear they assumed something serious had happened, which I supposed was accurate enough. Hannah was waiting in the main office when I arrived, her backpack already slung over her shoulder and worry creasing her forehead. Mom? What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine. We need to talk about something important. Let's go home. She didn't speak during the drive, sensing that whatever this was required privacy and my full attention rather than conversation in traffic. When we reached our apartment, I guided her to the couch and sat beside her, trying to find words for a question I didn't want to ask. Hannah, have you received any letters recently that seemed unusual? Anything handwritten or unexpected? Her face went pale, which answered my question before her words did. How did you know? The FBI contacted me. Victor Brennan has been using a contraband phone and the mail system to reach out to families. He sent letters to our address. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what to do. The first one came about 3 months ago. I saw it was from him and I just froze. I knew I should tell you, but I also knew it would upset you and bring everything back up when we were finally doing better. Did you read them? How many were there? 3. She wiped her eyes roughly. I read the first one because I thought maybe he was apologizing for real, you know? Like maybe he'd actually changed. But it was creepy, Mom. He said he thought about me every day, that he wished things could have been different, that he hoped I understood he never meant to hurt me. It felt wrong, like he was still trying to manipulate me even from prison. What did you do with them? I threw the first one away. The second one came a few weeks later, and I didn't even open it. Just tore it up and put it in the trash. Same with the third one. I thought if I ignored them, they'd stop coming. She looked at me with desperate eyes. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I just wanted to protect you from having to deal with him again. The impulse to protect me, even at 15, even after everything she'd been through, broke my heart. Oh honey, I pulled her into an embrace. You don't have to protect me. That's my job, protecting you. But I understand why you didn't tell me. I do. Are you mad? No. Worried, but not mad. The FBI needs to know about those letters, though. Even the ones you threw away. They're building a case about his prison conduct violations. Hannah nodded against my shoulder. There's something else. The third letter, the one I didn't open, I didn't actually throw it away yet. It's in my desk drawer. I kept meaning to get rid of it but couldn't make myself touch it again. Can you get it for me? She retrieved the envelope from her room, still sealed, with Victor Brennan's prison ID number printed in the corner and his handwriting spelling out our address. Looking at it made my skin crawl, this tangible evidence that he'd been thinking about Hannah, writing to her, attempting to re-establish contact from behind bars. I called Agent Hayes immediately, explaining what Hannah had told me. He arranged for an evidence team to come to our apartment that evening to collect the unopened letter and search our trash for any remnants of the others Hannah had destroyed. The agents were professional and kind, treating Hannah with the gentleness of people who understood she was a victim, not a suspect. After they left with their evidence bags, Hannah and I sat together in the dimming evening light of our living room. The violation felt fresh again, as if Victor Brennan had reached through time and space to remind us he still existed, still thought about us, still represented a threat even from prison. This is my fault, I said quietly. I should have arranged for mail screening or used a P.O. box. I should have anticipated he might try something like this. Mom, no. Hannah's voice was firm. You can't anticipate every move a predator makes. That's what Dr. Park always says. We take reasonable precautions, but we can't live in constant fear of every possibility. She was right, quoting back wisdom I'd helped instill in her. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were different things. The incident with the letters sparked something unexpected. Over the following weeks, as the FBI investigated Brennan's prison misconduct and contacted other families he'd reached, a pattern emerged. He'd been specifically targeting families who'd become advocates, who were speaking publicly about their experiences, who were working to change laws and improve protections for children online. Worse. Agent Hayes's expression was grim. He was contacting families of his previous victims. Specifically, he was attempting to reach the parents of girls he'd groomed, including you. The room seemed to tilt. What? He never got through to you directly because he didn't have your current phone number. You changed it after the trial, which was smart. But he contacted several other families, claiming he wanted to apologize, to seek forgiveness as part of his supposed rehabilitation. The calls were manipulative, designed to sound remorseful while actually gathering information and attempting to re-establish psychological control. Did he try to call me? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Agent Hayes pulled out a printout. He placed several calls to numbers associated with your previous address in Philadelphia, which he apparently got from old court documents or online searches. Those calls went to whoever lives there now. He also sent letters to your old address, which were forwarded by the Postal Service to your current apartment before prison officials caught on and stopped them. I never received any letters. Relief mixed with new fear. Did the Postal Service intercept them? No, they were delivered to your current address over the past few months. Small envelopes, handwritten addresses, probably looked like personal correspondence rather than anything alarming. I tried to remember my mail from recent months, the stack of bills and advertisements and occasional actual letters. Then it clicked. Hannah sometimes brought in the mail when she got home from school before me. Had she received letters from Victor Brennan and not told me? Agent Hayes seemed to read my expression. We need to ask Hannah if she received any correspondence from Brennan. If she did, we need to know what they contained and whether she responded. This isn't about getting her in trouble, but we need to understand the scope of his contact attempts. The drive back to Austin felt interminable. I called the school from my car and asked them to have Hannah ready to leave early, citing a family matter. The counselor's concerned questions made it clear they assumed something serious had happened, which I supposed was accurate enough. Hannah was waiting in the main office when I arrived, her backpack already slung over her shoulder and worry creasing her forehead. "Mom? What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. We need to talk about something important. Let's go home." She didn't speak during the drive, sensing that whatever this was required privacy and my full attention rather than conversation in traffic. When we reached our apartment, I guided her to the couch and sat beside her, trying to find words for a question I didn't want to ask. "Hannah, have you received any letters recently that seemed unusual? Anything handwritten or unexpected?" Her face went pale, which answered my question before her words did. "How did you know?" "The FBI contacted me. Victor Brennan has been using a contraband phone and the mail system to reach out to families. He sent letters to our address." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what to do. The first one came about 3 months ago. I saw it was from him and I just froze. I knew I should tell you, but I also knew it would upset you and bring everything back up when we were finally doing better. Did you read them? How many were there? 3. She wiped her eyes roughly. I read the first one because I thought maybe he was apologizing for real, you know? Like maybe he'd actually changed. But it was creepy, Mom. He said he thought about me every day, that he wished things could have been different, that he hoped I understood he never meant to hurt me. It felt wrong, like he was still trying to manipulate me even from prison. What did you do with them? I threw the first one away. The second one came a few weeks later, and I didn't even open it. Just tore it up and put it in the trash. Same with the third one. I thought if I ignored them, they'd stop coming. She looked at me with desperate eyes. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I just wanted to protect you from having to deal with him again. The impulse to protect me, even at 15, even after everything she'd been through, broke my heart. Oh honey, I pulled her into an embrace. You don't have to protect me. That's my job, protecting you. But I understand why you didn't tell me. I do. Are you mad? No. Worried, but not mad. The FBI needs to know about those letters, though. Even the ones you threw away. They're building a case about his prison conduct violations. Hannah nodded against my shoulder. There's something else. The third letter, the one I didn't open, I didn't actually throw it away yet. It's in my desk drawer. I kept meaning to get rid of it but couldn't make myself touch it again. Can you get it for me? She retrieved the envelope from her room, still sealed, with Victor Brennan's prison ID number printed in the corner and his handwriting spelling out our address. Looking at it made my skin crawl, this tangible evidence that he'd been thinking about Hannah, writing to her, attempting to re-establish contact from behind bars. I called Agent Hayes immediately, explaining what Hannah had told me. He arranged for an evidence team to come to our apartment that evening to collect the unopened letter and search our trash for any remnants of the others Hannah had destroyed. The agents were professional and kind, treating Hannah with the gentleness of people who understood she was a victim, not a suspect. After they left with their evidence bags, Hannah and I sat together in the dimming evening light of our living room. The violation felt fresh again, as if Victor Brennan had reached through time and space to remind us he still existed, still thought about us, still represented a threat even from prison. This is my fault, I said quietly. I should have arranged for mail screening or used a P.O. box. I should have anticipated he might try something like this. Mom, no. Hannah's voice was firm. You can't anticipate every move a predator makes. That's what Dr. Park always says. We take reasonable precautions, but we can't live in constant fear of every possibility. She was right, quoting back wisdom I'd helped instill in her. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were different things. The incident with the letters sparked something unexpected. Over the following weeks, as the FBI investigated Brennan's prison misconduct and contacted other families he'd reached, a pattern emerged. He'd been specifically targeting families who'd become advocates, who were speaking publicly about their experiences, who were working to change laws and improve protections for children online. Agent Hayes explained during a follow-up call that Brennan viewed these families as threats to others like him. By reaching out under the guise of seeking forgiveness, he was actually attempting to silence advocacy efforts, to make families uncomfortable enough with the attention that they'd retreat from public work. He wants you to be afraid, Agent Hayes said. He wants you to feel like speaking out makes you and Hannah vulnerable. That's his power play from prison since he can't do anything else. The realization made me furious in a way I hadn't felt since the initial arrest. Victor Brennan was in federal custody serving a 25-year sentence, and he was still trying to victimize families, still attempting to exert control. The audacity of it, the calculated malevolence, reinforced why the work we were doing mattered so much. I discussed it with the leadership team at the nonprofit during our next strategic planning meeting. They were supportive but concerned, wanting to ensure both Hannah's and my safety while recognizing that backing away from advocacy would hand Brennan exactly what he wanted. We need to go public with this, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Not just about Hannah receiving letters, but about the broader pattern of predators attempting to silence victims and families who speak out. We need to expose this tactic so other families know what to watch for. The communications director, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen who'd spent years doing crisis management for nonprofits, leaned forward with interest. That's a powerful angle, but it puts you and Hannah directly in the spotlight in a new way. Are you both prepared for that level of exposure? I didn't have an answer immediately. That evening, I sat down with Hannah and laid out the situation honestly. The nonprofit wanted to hold a press conference about Brennan's prison misconduct and the broader issue of predators attempting to intimidate advocate families. My participation would mean publicly discussing the letters, Hannah's decision to hide them from me, and our family's experience being targeted from behind prison walls. This would be different from the speaking engagements we'd done before, I explained. This would be news coverage, potentially national attention. Your name would still be protected, but people would know more details about our specific case. Some of them might try to figure out who we are. Hannah listened carefully, her face serious beyond her years. If we do this, will it help stop him from contacting other families? The FBI is already moving forward with additional charges related to the contraband phone and victim intimidation. But publicly exposing his tactics might help other families recognize similar manipulation attempts. It might make prisons take these violations more seriously. It might deter other predators from trying the same approach. Then we should do it, Hannah said firmly. I'm tired of letting him have any power over our lives. Even from prison, even through stupid letters, he's still trying to control us. I want to take that power away from him. Her courage astounded me. At 15, she'd already survived attempted predation, participated in a federal investigation, testified at trial, and become an advocate for other potential victims. Now she was choosing to face renewed public scrutiny because it served a larger purpose. The press conference was scheduled for 2 weeks later, giving us time to prepare and coordinate with the FBI's Public Affairs Office. Agent Hayes would present the law enforcement perspective on prison misconduct and ongoing risks from incarcerated predators. I would speak as a parent and advocate about the impact of intimidation attempts on families working to protect children. Patricia Chen would frame the broader context of victim silencing tactics. Hannah wouldn't appear at the press conference itself, but I would discuss her experience receiving the letters with her explicit permission. We practiced responses to potential questions, anticipated hostile inquiries, prepared for the emotional difficulty of reliving these details in front of cameras and reporters. The night before the press conference, I barely slept. I kept reviewing my prepared remarks, worrying about saying something wrong, about exposing Hannah to criticism or unwanted attention, about whether we were making the right choice. Natalie came over with wine and common sense. You're doing this for the right reasons, she reminded me. Not for revenge or attention, but because it might protect other families. That intention matters. What if it backfires? What if speaking out makes us bigger targets? Then you deal with that if it happens, with the same strength you've shown through everything else. But you can't make decisions based on fear of what predators might do. That's letting them win. The press conference was held in a hotel meeting room in downtown Austin, set up with a podium and microphones and rows of chairs that filled quickly with reporters and news cameras. Agent Hayes spoke first, detailing Victor Brennan's prison violations in clinical law enforcement language that somehow made the crimes feel both official and horrifying. Then it was my turn. I approached the podium with my prepared remarks trembling slightly in my hands, looking out at a sea of expectant faces and camera lenses. For a moment, I considered retreating, claiming sudden illness, protecting our privacy over public good. But then I thought about Hannah's courage, about the girl in Oklahoma who'd been saved because her mother recognized warning signs from our previous advocacy, about all the families who might be facing similar intimidation without understanding what it meant. "My name is Claire Donovan," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 2 years ago, my 14-year-old daughter was groomed by an online predator named Victor Brennan. We were fortunate. I discovered the situation before he could harm her physically, and the FBI arrested him before their planned meeting could occur. He was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. We thought that would be the end of our family's direct contact with him. We were wrong. I described the letters, Hannah's decision to hide them, the FBI's discovery of Brennan's broader campaign to contact multiple victim families. I explained how these attempts were designed not just to manipulate individual victims but to discourage advocacy work that threatened predators' ability to operate. Predators like Victor Brennan understand that public awareness is their enemy, I continued. Families who speak out, who educate others, who push for stronger protections for children, these families make it harder for predators to find and groom victims. So they attempt to silence us through intimidation, through making us feel unsafe, through forcing us back into private suffering instead of public advocacy. The questions afterward were direct and sometimes difficult. One reporter asked if I felt responsible for putting Hannah at risk by being so public about our experience. Another questioned whether press conferences like this gave predators ideas about tactics they might not have considered. A third asked pointedly whether my advocacy work was really about protecting children or about personal catharsis and attention. I answered each question as honestly as I could, acknowledging valid concerns while standing firm in my belief that silence served predators more than transparency ever could. Agent Hayes backed me up with statistics about recidivism rates and the importance of public awareness in prevention. Patricia Chin framed our work within the broader context of victim advocacy across multiple causes. The coverage that followed was intense but largely positive. National news outlets picked up the story, interviewing child safety experts who validated our approach and prison reform advocates who discussed the broader issue of contraband communication devices behind bars. Some commentators criticized our decision to be so public, arguing we were traumatizing Hannah for publicity. But more praised our courage and commitment to protecting other children. The day after the press conference, my phone and email exploded with messages. Some were supportive, thanking us for speaking out and sharing their own stories. Others were hostile, accusing me of exploitation or attention-seeking. A few were genuinely disturbing, seeming to come from predator sympathizers who resented our advocacy work. Agent Hayes arranged for increased monitoring of our online accounts and a security assessment of our apartment. The nonprofit provided resources for enhanced digital security and crisis management support. Hannah's school was briefed on the situation and agreed to extra vigilance about anyone attempting to contact or photograph her. For several weeks, our lives felt disrupted by the attention. Reporters occasionally showed up at our apartment building or my office, looking for follow-up stories. Hannah dealt with classmates who'd seen news coverage and asked intrusive questions. I struggled with the constant awareness that our story was being discussed by strangers in comment sections and social media threads. But something else happened too. The press conference sparked renewed discussion about prison security and the need for better monitoring of inmate communications with crime victims. Several state legislatures introduced bills to strengthen protections against predator contact with victims from behind bars. Other families who'd experienced similar intimidation reached out, forming a support network of people who understood this specific violation. Most importantly, corrections officials in multiple states reviewed their protocols and implemented new safeguards. The facility where Victor Brennan was housed conducted a comprehensive investigation that led to disciplinary actions against staff who'd facilitated his access to contraband phones. While systemic change was slow, there was movement in the right direction. Hannah and I processed the experience in therapy, individually and together. Dr. Park helped us understand that going public had been traumatic in its own way, that exposure and criticism took an emotional toll even when the decision was right. She also helped us recognize our own resilience, our ability to withstand discomfort in service of values we believed in. 3 months after the press conference, when the initial media frenzy had died down and life had returned to something approaching normal, I received an email from a woman in Oregon named Lisa Morrison. She explained that her 13-year-old son had been groomed by an online predator and nearly convinced to run away from home. The predator was arrested and convicted, and Lisa had started speaking publicly about the experience to help other families. Recently, she'd received letters from the predator attempting to re-establish contact and make her feel guilty for her advocacy work. Seeing our press conference had helped her understand this was a deliberate silencing tactic rather than genuine remorse. She'd reported the letters to authorities and connected with other families experiencing similar intimidation. She was organizing a coalition of advocate families to push for stronger legislation protecting victims from predator contact. Would you be interested in joining us? Her email concluded. Your voice and experience would be valuable. Together, we might be able to create real systemic change. I showed the email to Hannah that evening. She read it carefully, then looked up at me with thoughtful eyes. This is what it's all about, isn't it? Not just our story, but connecting with other people fighting the same battles. Making sure predators can't isolate us the way they isolate their victims. Exactly, I agreed. We're stronger together than we ever could be alone. I replied to Lisa Morrison's email, accepting her invitation to join the coalition. Over the following months, I connected with dozens of other parents and survivors, forming relationships based on shared experience and common purpose. We collaborated on legislative proposals, supported each other through difficult moments, and built a network of advocacy that stretched across state lines. Agent Hayes remained an ally throughout, providing guidance on effective approaches and connecting us with other law enforcement professionals who understood the importance of our work. He shared updates on Victor Brennan's case, including additional charges filed related to his prison misconduct. The original 25-year sentence was extended, and Brennan was transferred to a higher security facility with stricter communication monitoring. The journey from that terrifying discovery of grooming messages to this place of collective advocacy had transformed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I'd gone from a single mother barely keeping her head above water to a recognized voice in child safety advocacy. Hannah had evolved from a vulnerable victim to an empowered survivor who used her experience to protect others. But perhaps most importantly, we'd learned that speaking truth about difficult experiences, even when it made us uncomfortable or vulnerable, had power that silence never could. Every family we helped, every predator tactic we exposed, every small victory towards systemic change, these things gave meaning to what we'd survived. Victor Brennan had tried to silence us from prison, to make us afraid of the spotlight we'd stepped into. Instead, his attempts at intimidation had strengthened our resolve and expanded our advocacy. We'd taken his attempt at reasserting control and transformed it into fuel for the work of protecting children he'd hoped to discourage. That transformation, from victims who'd gotten lucky to advocates making deliberate change, felt like the truest form of victory we could achieve. The text message arrived on a Saturday morning 3 years after Victor Brennan's initial arrest. Agent Hayes rarely contacted me on weekends unless something significant had happened, so seeing his name on my phone while Hannah and I were making pancakes immediately commanded my attention. Brennan died in prison last night. Thought you should know before it hits the news. Natural causes, heart attack. He was 45. I read the message twice, waiting for some emotional reaction to surface. Relief, perhaps, or satisfaction that justice had been served in its most final form. Instead, I felt oddly empty, as if this information belonged to a different version of myself from years ago. Hannah noticed my expression. What's wrong? I showed her the message. She read it silently, her face unreadable, then handed the phone back and returned to flipping pancakes with careful attention. We finished breakfast preparation in thoughtful quiet, each processing the news in our own way. It's weird, Hannah finally said as we sat down to eat. I thought I'd feel something big when he died. Happy or relieved or something. But mostly I just feel like a chapter closed that I'd already moved past. That's healthy, I replied. It means he doesn't have power over your emotions anymore. He's just a person who did terrible things and now he's gone. Do you think he ever felt sorry? Actually sorry, not the fake manipulation kind? I considered the question carefully. Honestly? No. People like him are fundamentally broken in ways that don't heal. But it doesn't matter anymore whether he felt remorse. What matters is what we built from what he tried to destroy. The news broke by afternoon, with several outlets running stories about Victor Brennan's death and his history of crimes against children. Some articles mentioned our case specifically, noting that one of his intended victims had become a prominent advocate for online safety. My phone buzzed with messages from other families in our coalition, from colleagues at the nonprofit, from reporters seeking comments. I drafted a brief statement with Patricia Chen's help, something that acknowledged Brennan's death without celebrating it or minimizing his crimes. While his death brings closure to some chapters, our work to protect children from online predators continues. The systems that allowed him to target vulnerable young people still need reform. Our focus remains on prevention, education, and supporting survivors. The statement felt appropriately measured, focused on forward action rather than dwelling on the past. Several news outlets quoted it verbatim, which helped control the narrative in a way that felt important. Hannah's response was different but equally powerful. She wrote a blog post for the nonprofit's website about survivorship and closure, about how healing doesn't require the perpetrator's remorse or even their continued existence. The piece was vulnerable and wise, demonstrating emotional maturity that came from hard-won experience. Some survivors might feel relief when their abuser dies, she wrote. Others might feel cheated of the ongoing accountability they wanted. I feel mostly grateful that I survived, that I had people who protected me, and that I've been able to use my experience to help others. His death doesn't change any of that. The work continues regardless. The post resonated widely, shared thousands of times across social media by survivor advocacy groups and child safety organizations. Hannah received messages from other young survivors thanking her for articulating feelings they couldn't express themselves. Watching her transform her pain into connection with others never stopped moving me. Lisa Morrison from Oregon called that evening, checking in on both of us. The coalition we'd built over the past 3 years had become genuine friendship, bound by shared mission and mutual support. How are you two processing this? Surprisingly well, I admitted. It feels like the end of something, but not in the dramatic way I might have expected years ago. More like closing a book we'd already mostly finished reading. That makes sense. You've both done the work of healing and moving forward. His death is just a footnote at this point, not the main story. She was right. The main story was the lives we'd built, the families we'd helped, the systems we'd pushed to change. Victor Brennan had been a catalyst for transformation, but he wasn't the transformation itself. That belonged to us, to the choices we'd made about how to respond to attempted harm. Hannah graduated high school that spring with honors, having maintained strong academics while juggling her advocacy work and normal teenage activities. She'd been accepted to several universities, ultimately choosing one with a strong psychology program and active student organizations focused on social justice. Her essay about surviving online predation and choosing to become an advocate had apparently resonated with admissions committees. At her graduation party, surrounded by friends and family including Trevor who'd eventually become a genuine co-parent rather than an adversarial one, I watched Hannah laugh and celebrate with the uncomplicated joy of someone who'd earned her accomplishments. Brooklyn was there, their friendship having weathered the storms of adolescence and trauma. Natalie brought an embarrassingly large cake. Even Agent Hayes sent a congratulatory card with a note about how proud he was of the person Hannah had become. This is who we fought for, I thought, watching Hannah pose for photos with her friends. Not the frightened 14-year-old who'd been groomed and nearly destroyed, but this confident young woman who transformed vulnerability into strength. Later that evening, after guests had left and we were cleaning up together, Hannah asked an unexpected question. Mom, do you ever regret how public we went with everything? All the speaking and press conferences and attention? I paused, considering honestly. There were hard moments, definitely. Times when I questioned whether we'd exposed you to too much scrutiny. But ultimately? No. I think we turned something horrible into something meaningful. We helped people. That matters more than the discomfort. Hannah smiled, the expression carrying depths of understanding that came from shared experience. I agree. And you know what? I think even if Brennan had never been caught, even if things had gone differently, I'd still want to be someone who helps people. This path we ended up on, it feels right. Like this is who I was always meant to become. Her words captured something essential about our journey. We hadn't just survived a threat and moved on. We'd been fundamentally changed by the experience, shaped into people who understood darkness but chose to create light. The advocacy work we'd built wasn't compensation for trauma. It was authentic expression of values forged through fire. Years later, when people ask me about that terrifying period when my daughter was targeted by a predator, I tell them the truth. It was the worst experience of my life and simultaneously the catalyst for the most meaningful work I've ever done. I almost lost my daughter, and in the desperate scramble to save her, I found purpose I didn't know I was missing. Hannah became a psychologist specializing in adolescent trauma. I continued leading family education programs for the nonprofit, expanding our reach to schools and communities nationwide. We still spoke together occasionally at conferences. Our dynamic evolved into professional colleagues who happened to be mother and daughter. Victor Brennan had intended to harm my child and add her to his list of victims. Instead, his attempt created two advocates who spent years protecting countless other children. His evil became the seed for something constructive, not because we forgave him or minimized his crimes, but because we refused to let what he tried to do define us permanently. That refusal, that choice to transform pain into purpose, remains the most powerful form of victory I can imagine. We took the worst thing that almost happened and built something better from its ruins. And every family we help, every child we protect, every system we improve stands as testament that survivors can become warriors, that wounds can forge wisdom, and that the people who try to break us sometimes end up creating exactly the strength they feared most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.